2 out of 3 jobs posted as entry-level go-to candidates with 7+ years of experience. Sit with that. The word is supposed to mean a door that's open. The data says it's a wall dressed up as a door. If the label requires nearly a decade of prior work to qualify, it's not a starting point, it's a euphemism, and it's been recycled for 40 straight years. Take a computer science graduate in 2026, supposedly the safe major, the recession-proof degree. She sends out 400 applications. She hears back from 6. 2 are rejections generated the same day she applied. This is the field parents pointed to as the guaranteed path. Zero guarantee survived contact with the actual market. Rewind to 1983, Braddock, Pennsylvania. Steel country, gutted. Time magazine sent a reporter to profile a crane operator's son watching the mills shut around him, asking the only question that mattered. What future exists when a high school diploma can't even buy you a job interview? Blue-collar despair wasn't a phase. It was the opening chapter. Fast forward to 2001. A law school graduate steps into a workforce collapsing mid-dot-com bust. 6 figures of debt already signed. Her own words, the rules changed, and the bar got raised beyond what any of us could reach. Same promise as always. Work hard, get the degree. Same result as always. The goalposts moved first. 2009. Millennial youth unemployment hits 19.2%, double the national rate, 1 year after the most educated generation in American history collects its diplomas. More credentials than any cohort before them, less access to a first job than any cohort before them. The correlation between work harder and get hired had already broken. Nobody updated the advice. 4 generations, 4 different decades, 1 recurring failure. Think of the career ladder, the thing you're supposed to climb, rung by rung, from mailroom to management. Every decade since the 70s, someone sawed off the bottom rung and called it progress. Not one generation inherited a stronger ladder than the one before it. Every single one inherited less. Here's how bad it actually is. Right now, in numbers nobody's arguing with. Anthropic's own CEO puts a figure on it. AI is projected to wipe out half of all entry-level white-collar roles within 4 years. Not disrupt, eliminate. The company building the technology is the one issuing the warning. That's not a prediction from a skeptic. That's a confession from an insider. And it compounds. By the end of 2026, over a third of companies say they will have frozen entry-level hiring outright. No interviews, no postings, nothing. By 2027, nearly half plan to eliminate the entry-level tier completely. Not slow it, not restructure it, remove it. The bottom rung isn't being weakened anymore. It's being unbolted from the ladder. So, here's the real question. Not one everyone's asking. Not, is the job market bad for Gen Z? It obviously is. The question is, why the exact same system gets to fail the exact same way every 20 years, generation after generation, with zero accountability attached to anyone who built it, ran it, or profited from it. That's the through line. That's what we're tracing. 4 decades, 4 generations, 1 broken ladder, rebuilt worse every time it fails. So we're going level by level, the actual mechanics of how the entry-level job got hollowed out, decade by decade, decision by decision, starting at the one moment the ladder still worked, before anyone touched it. Level 1, the baseline, before the sabotage. Post-war America ran on internal labor markets. Firms hired you at 18, trained you from the mailroom up, and promised, implicitly, that loyalty bought security. Economists called it the organization man era. You joined a company the way you joined a family. That system existed. It worked, imperfectly, for about 30 years. Then it didn't. Here's the turning point, named precisely. 1970, Milton Friedman, in the New York Times, arguing that a corporation has exactly one social responsibility: increase its profits. Nothing about workers. Nothing about training the next generation up from the mailroom. That single doctrine became the philosophical seed for everything that followed, the moment the ladder stopped being anyone's job to maintain. The 1980s cashed that doctrine in. Leveraged buyouts swept through American industry, and General Electric's Jack Welch turned rank and yank into a management religion. Headcount as a cost line, not a commitment. The old firm handshake, hire and train for life mentality got replaced by a spreadsheet question. What's the cheapest way to get this work done? Entry-level training was the first line item cut. Put a number on deindustrialization. Entry-level wages for young men fell from $12.19 an hour in 1979 to $8.72 by 1995. Adjusted, that's a real collapse, not a rounding error. An entire tier of first jobs didn't just get harder to find. It got paid nearly a third less to hold, while the cost of everything else kept climbing. The wage collapse wasn't a man's problem. Young women saw the exact same slide, entry-level pay falling from $9.01 to $7.43 an hour in constant dollars, same BLS tables, no demographic carve-out, no exception for the group employers claim to be investing in. When erosion hits every group identically, it stops being a story about gender and becomes a story about the floor sinking under the whole labor market. Go back to William West, the crane operator from earlier, the one who watched 3 decades of entry-level jobs disappear under him. He said it plain, he didn't know what kind of ladder his son would even find to climb. Not anger, not despair, just a man doing the math on a future he could see closing, one rung at a time, and refusing to lie to his own kid about it. Here's the number that breaks the story open. Only 28% of all jobs created in the 1980s were high-skill roles. 28%. The rest, factory work gone, replaced by retail counters and fast food registers, absorbed the graduates anyway, degree or no degree. You could finish college, do everything asked of you, and still get funneled into a $7 an hour counter job, because that's simply what the economy was manufacturing that decade. This is where the trap gets built. A 1983 New York Times piece quotes a retail recruiter laying out a new rule called "A degree wasn't enough anymore. They wanted a degree and prior experience for entry level." Read that again. Entry level requiring experience isn't a 2020 complaint, it isn't a TikTok gripe, it's a documented hiring practice from over 40 years ago, and it's been quietly compounding ever since. Level 2, Generation X. Same promise, new decade, go to school, work hard, the ladder will be there. They came of age straight into the dot-com hiring boom, entry-level tech jobs, stock options, the whole mythology. Then, almost overnight, it collapsed. Trillions evaporated, hiring froze company by company, and the cohort just told they'd made it, watched the door slam shut behind them. Two forces stack on top of each other now. First, too many graduates chasing too few openings, a straight oversupply problem. Second, experience is now the baseline requirement, not the bonus. Together, that combination hands employers all the leverage. They can suppress starting wages and still fill every seat, and they do it to the first generation, carrying real, compounding student debt into the workforce. Remember John Conway from earlier? Here's his quote in full. "I'm still making entry-level pay while rent, groceries, everything keeps climbing. Buying a house, having kids, it's not decided against, it's just pushed back indefinitely. That's not a complaint about ambition. That's a man doing arithmetic on a system that stopped moving while the cost of living kept climbing without it." Zoom out for a second. Total US student debt, tracked decade by decade, starts its real climb right here. From Gen X's dot-com bust onward, the number never goes back down. It just accelerates generation after generation toward the $1 trillion mark that will eventually define every cohort that comes after. Not a spike, not a correction, a permanent compounding line moving in exactly one direction. Quick pattern interrupt, because this matters later. When ATMs rolled out, everyone assumed bank teller jobs would vanish. They didn't, not at first. Teller employment held roughly steady for years. The role just changed shape. From counting cash to selling services machines couldn't. Keep that in your pocket. Automation doesn't always delete a job. Sometimes it just rewrites what entry level even means. Track it across generations and the same shape shows up everywhere. Marriage age, home ownership age, first child, every single one pushed later, decade over decade. In the long run demographic data, it's not one bad year, it's not one unlucky cohort. It's a straight, downward sloping line running from the 1980s through today. Every milestone quietly rescheduled by a labor market that stopped paying what it used to. So if you think this stopped with Gen X, wait. Because this is exactly where it gets worse. The next generation doesn't just inherit a weaker ladder. They inherit a financial crisis timed almost perfectly to their graduation date, and a job market about to test the entry-level promise harder than it's ever been tested before. Level 3, 2008. Millennials walk into adulthood as the most educated generation in American history. 70% of them pursue higher ed by age 25, more than any generation before them. They do exactly what they were told would guarantee a place on the ladder. And then the floor drops out from under the entire economy at once. Within a year of walking that stage, youth unemployment hits 19.2%, more than double the national average at the time. Not a soft landing, not a rough patch, a direct, real-time gutting of the just get a degree promise that every single one of them had been sold since kindergarten, delivered by the worst job market in decades. With entry-level jobs gone, a new gatekeeper steps in, the internship. In 1992, only 17% of college students had ever done one. By 2008, that number hits 83%. The unpaid or barely paid internship isn't a bonus line on a resume anymore, it's the actual front door, and if you can't afford to work for free, you don't get to walk through it. Here's how it became legal. The Fair Labor Standards Act has a clause called the primary beneficiary test. If a company can argue the intern gains more than the business does, the labor is free, no wage required. It's vague on purpose and companies noticed. A 2010 NBC News report found unpaid internship postings had tripled in just 2 years. Not a loophole anymore, a business model. And here's the part they don't put in the posting. There's no contract that says free work today becomes a paycheck tomorrow. None. You can intern for 6 months, outperform every metric they hand you, and still get a "will keep you in mind" on your way out. The risk of hiring, all of it, gets quietly transferred from the company's balance sheet onto yours. Run that forward a decade and you get a number. By 2016, the average millennial household sat 34% below the wealth economists expected for their age and their education level. Not below some fantasy, below the model, the actual formula that predicted what a college-educated worker of that age should have saved by then. A third of the expected wealth just gone, structurally. So what did the culture do with that number? Nothing productive. Op-eds blamed avocado toast. Talk shows blamed participation trophies. The same line got recycled from boomers to Gen X to millennials, word for word. Suck it up, buttercup. Every generation struggles. Except, every generation wasn't losing 34% of expected wealth to a documented structural shift. The diagnosis kept changing. The blame never left the worker. Now here's where it stops being about entry level and becomes about the whole structure. Since the financial crisis, the US has lost 43% of its mid-wage occupations, the jobs that used to sit between first job and career. In their place, 58% more low-wage jobs, not a shortage of jobs. A collapse of the tier that used to sit right above the bottom rung. So the metaphor has to update. This was never just the bottom rung getting sawed off. The middle of the ladder is gone too. That means even if you claw your way into a bad first job, survive it, do everything right, the next rung, the one that used to be there to climb onto, doesn't exist anymore. You don't get stuck at the bottom. You get stuck, period. Let's count where we are. Boomers got the myth, Gen X got the warning signs, millennials got the receipts, the wealth gap, the vanishing middle rungs, the data. 3 generations down, Gen Z doesn't just inherit this. Gen Z is the first to face it with a machine also watching. That's not a metaphor. That's the next 4 minutes. Level 4. Gen Z is walking into the worst entry-level job market in almost 40 years. Not my framing. That's the label labor economists are using. Over 70% of postings labeled entry-level require a degree. Nearly 40% demand 3 to 5 years of experience. Read that again. Entry-level, requiring experience you can only get from a job you can't get. That's the trap in one sentence. Here's a number that should stop you. Adjusted not just for inflation, but for the actual promise attached to it. The promise of upward mobility. Median entry-level pay today sits barely above what a Ford factory worker earned on the assembly line in 1914. That's not a typo. The dollar figure moved. The promise behind the dollar figure didn't move at all. It went backward. Now the mechanism behind the postings themselves. 75% of employers claim they can't find qualified candidates. Researchers tested that claim directly. 300 real applications sent to real postings, tracked start to finish. The results. 12% got any response at all. 5% showed real interest. 0 resulted in a hire. The jobs weren't hard to fill. Some of them weren't real. And here's the part that breaks the logic completely. Candidates who met 90% or more of the listed requirements got ghosted more often, not less. Algorithmic filters are tuned to flag too senior or too specific as a mismatch, and inflated listings, jobs demanding skills no entry-level role actually needs, punish exactly the applicants who did everything asked of them. The system filters out competence on purpose. Now flip to the major everyone told Gen Z was the safe one. Federal Reserve of New York data on graduates aged 22 to 27 shows computer science and computer engineering majors posting some of the highest unemployment rates of any field tracked. More than double biology, more than double art history. The degree sold as the escape hatch is now one of the hardest doors to walk through. Zoom into IT specifically, and the number gets worse. Nearly 60% of roles labeled entry-level in tech now demand 3 to 5 years of prior experience. This is the exact door every guidance counselor pointed Gen Z toward. Learn to code, get the degree, the jobs are there. The jobs are there, they're just locked behind a requirement that contradicts the word entry-level by definition. So who's filling the gap? The H-1B visa program exists on paper for specialty roles the US genuinely lacks talent for. A narrow, specific exception. But in IT, the share of the workforce filled by H-1B holders has surged past 65% in 5 years. That's not a narrow exception anymore. That's the primary hiring channel in a field graduates were told was theirs to walk into. Here's the twist nobody prints on a graduation card. Federal data now shows the majority of H-1B approvals go to positions labeled entry level, not senior engineers, not rare specialists. Open Indeed right now, search entry level, filter by visa sponsorship available. The listings are sitting there in plain text. The word entry level didn't disappear from the job market. It just stopped meaning for you. Here's the systemic read, not a moral one. Experience required was never really a skills filter. It's a legal justification. To sponsor a visa, a company must first prove it couldn't find a qualified American. Writing entry-level, 3 years required isn't a contradiction, it's a paper trail. Manufacturing the exact shortage the law needs to justify hiring cheaper. That's not an accident, that's an incentive structure, working exactly as designed. Enter the headline fix, a new $100,000 fee on H-1B petitions, announced like a wall going up. Sounds tough until you check the math. A company paying an entry-level hire $65,000 while saving on training and leverage treats $100,000 as a rounding error against a hiring budget in the billions. Amazon, Google, Meta absorb it without blinking. The fee isn't a barrier, it's a number engineered to sound like one. So if this is the kind of thing you want tracked, the fee, the filing, the fine print nobody reads, that's what this channel does. Not motivation, not 5 tips to hustle harder, just the system, mapped clearly, one document at a time. If that's useful to you, subscribe. If you're here for a pep talk, this isn't it. We've got more to trace, starting with the machines. Automation warnings are not new. Every generation got one. Machines would take the factory jobs, then the assembly lines, then the call centers. Workers adapted mostly. But this wave is different in one way. AI isn't coming for the floor, it's coming for the first rung of the office. The research, the drafting, the summarizing, the junior analysis that used to be how you learned the job by doing it. Here's the complication headline skip. MIT research tracking corporate AI pilots found that 95% of them are currently failing to deliver return, not glitchy, failing. Companies rushing generative AI into workflows are mostly burning budget on tools that don't stick. So the disruption story isn't the clean, inevitable rollout it's sold as. It's messy, expensive, and half-built, which makes the layoffs happening anyway even harder to explain away as necessity. MIT calls it the iceberg index, and the name is exact. Their model estimates AI could technically replace 11.7% of the US labor market, roughly $120 trillion in wages, concentrated in finance, healthcare, and professional services. But current AI-attributed layoffs account for just 2.2% of that exposure. Read that gap. Most of the iceberg hasn't surfaced yet. What's happening to entry-level work today is the tip, not the mass underneath. A 2025 Stanford Digital Economy Lab study makes it precise. Researchers tracked payroll data across the most AI-exposed occupations and found employment for workers aged 22 to 25 already declining. In the identical roles, older workers stayed stable. Same job title, same tasks, same exposure to the technology. Only the youngest layer is absorbing the hit. That's where the disruption lands first. Remember Dario Modei's prediction from earlier, AI eliminating half of entry-level white-collar jobs. Here's the reframe that matters. His own justification isn't about capability, it's about stamina. He describes AI working 8-hour shifts without fatigue, without burnout, without needing a lunch break. Notice what's missing from that pitch. Any plan for what humans do next. Any mention of a new training pathway to replace the one being deleted. Now the steelman, because the strongest argument deserves airtime. HR analyst Josh Bersin argues entry-level roles won't disappear because companies structurally need them as leadership pipelines. Today's junior analyst is tomorrow's manager, and you can't promote from a pipeline that doesn't exist. It's a real argument backed by how corporate succession planning actually works. If entry-level jobs vanish, the theory goes, companies eventually run out of future leaders to promote. Here's the rebuttal, and it's calm, not combative. Bersin's argument only holds if entry-level roles still function as pipelines. But we just spent 20 minutes proving they stopped functioning that way 40 years ago, gutted in the 1980s, and never rebuilt since. AI didn't break the pipeline. AI showed up decades later to find a pipeline that was already empty and started pouring into the gap. Which brings us to the real engine underneath all of this. This was never a jobs story, it's an incentives story. Public companies report quarterly, and quarterly earnings reward headcount cuts instantly, the stock moves the same day. Training investment pays off in 3 to 5 years, past most executives' tenure. Cutting entry-level roles isn't a failure of the system, it's the system responding exactly to its incentives. And here's the proof, none of this is inevitable. Germany runs a dual education system, apprenticeships built directly into the school pipeline, companies legally embedded in training teenagers alongside their coursework. The result? German youth unemployment sits structurally lower than the US, regardless of economic cycle. This isn't a utopian fix, it's a functioning, decades-old counter-model proving the broken ladder was a choice, not a law of economics. So say it, one generation at a time. West in the 1980s, nobody wants to hire the entry-level guy. Conway in 2001, graduating into a market with no rungs left. Millennials in 2009, told to suck it up, entering the worst job market since the Depression. Gen Z now told the same thing. 40 years, 4 generations, one sentence repeated. The ladder was never rebuilt. It was sold for parts. Push the timeline forward 15, 20 years. Gen Alpha enters a job market already being built right now, with even less human judgment between an application and a rejection than what Gen Z fights through today. Nobody credible can tell you what that market looks like. Not the Fed, not MIT, not the engineers writing the filters. That gap isn't reassurance. It's an open question nobody in power has answered. Here's the fork nobody wants to say out loud. If AI actually works as advertised, it displaces millions of entry-level roles with zero transition plan, no retraining pipeline, no wage floor, nothing built to catch anyone. If it doesn't work, if the trillion-dollar infrastructure bet underdelivers, that capital still has to unwind somewhere, and markets don't unwind gently. Either way, the shock lands on the same generation's shoulders. Drop the framing you've heard since the 80s. This was never about whether Gen Z can grind hard enough, apply wide enough, or hustle its way around a ladder with the bottom rung sawed off. The system was broken before any of them filled out a single application. The only question left standing is whether the people who hold the power to rebuild that ladder will actually choose to. One ask, and it's not a favor, it's an identity. If you're the person who wants the receipts before the reassurance, that's what this channel is for. Subscribe on that basis or not at all. No pep talk, no fresh start music, just the number this video opened on. 2 out of every 3 entry-level jobs still demand experience an entry-level worker cannot have. 2/3